This is episode 92 of the 99 Forever podcast. I'm Eric Friesen, and my guest tonight is making his third appearance on the podcast. He's a contributor for HeavyHockey.com, Bob Schmidt. Bob, it's good to have you back on the show.
Always a pleasure. Number 3, eh? That's the hat trick one. I'm not sure if a goalie should be celebrating a hat trick or not, but I'll take it.
A rare time. I mean, I'm sure there's been a few hat tricks over the years, maybe against you, that you weren't as big of a fan of. Although, I'm not trying to disparage your goaltending skills at all there. I have a feeling that didn't happen too often to you.
Let's just move on.
We don't want to talk about those days. And yeah, it's the first time you've been on since the season predictions episode with Ryan and Kirk back in the fall. So maybe in the off season, I'll have to go back and check how many of those we nailed and how many we were way off on.
I'm willing to bet that it's about 95% failure rate on that one, but it was a heck of a fun episode regardless.
Oh, yeah. One of my favorites that I did this season. And 3 of us predicted that the Oilers were going to win the Stanley Cup this year. So hopefully we'll be proven right on that in about 7 weeks. And tonight we'll be recapping games 3 and 4 between the Edmonton Oilers and the Los Angeles Kings. But first, the hockey world sadly lost legendary play-by-play voice Bob Cole at the age of 90 last week. And for hockey fans from coast to coast, his voice provided a distinctive soundtrack to Canada's game. Bob, what did Bob Cole mean to you as a fan growing up?
Well, he's the voice of my youth when it comes to hockey. I mean, my 2 voices were Rod Phillips on the radio, and then when we got TV, then it was Bob Cole, especially with his sidekick Harry Neal. They were the dynamic duo on Hockey Night in Canada for years. Every memory I have, or the majority of the memories I have, when I play those replays in my head or watch them on YouTube or what have you, it's Bob Cole's voice that's narrating the story for me. And he provided that lift, that energy, and he knew when to get excited about a play. He knew when to just call the play. Like, he was the voice of hockey for me for so many years of my youth.
Yeah, I mean, for 5 decades, he was the lead play-by-play announcer on Hockey Night in Canada. So you could have 3 generations of hockey fans in one family who all have fond memories of listening to Bob Cole call games on Saturday nights. And while there are many great hockey broadcasters out there, I don't think anyone ever mastered the flow of the game the way he did. As you kind of spoke about, he knew when to elevate a moment without getting in the way. Just such a fantastic talent. And for me, I think the 3 most memorable calls for the Oilers would be the final moments of Game 5 of the 1984 Stanley Cup Final, when he said, "Folks, there's a new bunch on the block in the National Hockey League. The Edmonton Oilers, by name, have won the Stanley Cup." And, that preceded me by 5 years. I wasn't born until 1989, but still a famous call that everyone seems to know 4 decades later. And then in the 1997 playoffs, which was the first playoff run that I really followed, he had the call on Todd Marchand's goal as he blazed in all alone and fired a shot past former Oilers goalie Andy Moog in overtime to eliminate the heavily favored Dallas Stars in the first round. And then in 2006, he called Fernando Pisani's shorthanded overtime winner in Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Final, which remains one of the most famous goals in Oilers history. And then even 10 years after that, he was a part of the farewell to Rexall Place on-ice ceremony where Wayne Gretzky and Mark Messier spoke about how special it was to have him call their game. So you can just tell from the way that everyone spoke about him, from former players to fans. He just meant a lot to everyone who really was a fan of Hockey Night in Canada and CBC over the past, like I said, 50 years.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of funny how you listed off those as highlights, because 2 of those 3 that you mentioned were mine as well. Like the first Stanley Cup, I am old enough to remember that one at 9 years old when that was happening. And I got goosebumps when he announced that the Oilers were the Stanley Cup champions. I remember the scene of Dave Lumley throwing his hands up in the air, and I believe it was Dave Hunter that was hugging him from behind. But and just the confetti flying, the streamers flying. And Bob Cole announcing that they were Stanley Cup champions. I had goosebumps at the age of 9. As well. The only difference I had on your list, I know the Pisani goal was a huge one because it's such an epic goal and monumental goal. But on that playoff run, the one that strikes me was the Mike Pekka breakaway goal from a pass from Dwayne Rosen
against the Ducks.
yeah, just the excitement in Bob Cole's voice when he saw it develop, when he saw Rolson see Pekka, and all of a sudden this was happening, was just, it gave me goosebumps again.
Yeah, we were very lucky to listen to a guy like that for so many years. And you could, like I said, you could talk to anyone from age probably 30 to 70, because the younger generation wouldn't probably know him as well because he's been retired for a few years. But just such a wide range of fans who were able to listen to him for so many years. And we were lucky that he called so many great Oilers moments too.
Well, there was also, I'm hearing stories about him, obviously, as people do when, after something like that passes away, but something that you never really notice until after the fact. There was moments where he would just be silent and let the crowd noise just wash over. Like, he knew when to interject, and he knew when to let the game do the talking. So he really perfected it and made it an art form.
It is. And as someone who's done play-by-play as a freelancer over the past 10 years or so, it's challenging to call hockey games. And the fact that he made it look so effortless and like you said, knew when to let the game breathe, it's truly a skill. And when you when you do it for as long as he did, I mean, I don't know if anyone will ever be better than Bob. He's right up there, if not one of the greatest of all time. So, yeah, it's a sad loss for all Canadians, and rest in peace, Bob Cole. You will forever be a Canadian icon.
90 years old is a good run, so he did his diligent duty and was fantastic.
Absolutely. All right, let's dive into this series now between the Oilers and Kings. And Bob, after dropping Game 2 in overtime at Rogers Place, were you concerned at all as this series headed back to LA for the next two games?
Well, my only concern was the fact that we kind of lost home ice advantage on after that Game 2 loss. But I actually said from the beginning in my playoff predictions, I kind of thought this to be a potential 7-game series. So I knew somewhere along the line that we're going to be facing some adversity with these Kings. They made some good adjustments in Game 2, and I was very interested to see the adjustments that Knoblauch would make for Game 3 and how we'd counter that. That's one of my favorite things about playoffs, because you do meet that same team over and over again. The coaches are that much more relevant when it comes to all the adjustments they have to make. And that's what I was more curious about. I was more curious about that than nervous about that for Game 3.
Yeah, I mean, the Oilers know how to beat this team, and I talked about this on the last episode too, but they came into this series with an 8-5 record over the past 2 years in the playoffs. This year, they split the season series, or sorry, I should say the Oilers won 3 out of 4. They were down 2-0 in a game in December on the road in LA and came back to win it in a shootout. But it was the year before that where they split, but in the regular season. But you're looking at these two teams. The Oilers match up very well against them. And I'll give the Kings credit. They do have some talent on that roster, but they just can't match the high-end skill that the Oilers have. So I was confident that the Oilers were going to come back at least up, or at least tied in the series, but hopefully up 3-1 as they have now. But it's disappointing that they did, as you said, lose home ice with that Game 2 loss, because going into the series, I predicted it would be a 5-game series, and I think it still will be, and if the Oilers do cap things off on home ice tomorrow night. But I predicted that they would win the first 2 games at home, lose one of the 2 on the road, and come back and finish it up. So, yeah, it was a tough one, especially because they came out and finally ended their Game 1 drought. It had been 7 straight Game 1 losses for this team. So getting over that hump was big, and you'd like to see them follow it up with a strong Game 2 performance, but the Kings just jumped out early. And even though they fought back to erase multiple 2-goal efforts, or deficits, I should say, just got a bad bounce in overtime, and that was it. But I wasn't overly concerned because I knew that this team had what it takes to come back and beat the Kings.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Eric, is that the Oilers didn't play that great. They played okay. In all fairness, like Skinner had his struggles that game a bit, and it still took overtime for LA to beat us. So when that happened, I'm like, we didn't play our best game, and it still took LA to play one of their better games, and it still had to go to overtime for them to beat us. I still took some confidence out of that, knowing that we're not going to put 2 of those games together or 3 of those games together. So we step it up even a couple notches. LA's in our pocket.
Yeah, and one thing that has kind of been an issue for this team in the past is they often beat themselves, and I think that was something I was hoping that the maturity would be over, and they did show that in game 1. But then, like I said, falling behind 3-1 with some careless mistakes. There's a couple of those goals, the Doughty goal on the breakaway and the Kempe goal. Those are 2 where you can see the play developing, and that there were some mistakes made in the neutral zone that led to those goals. So
yeah,
I felt like you take away the middle of the ice a little better there, and you're probably going into the break 1-1, and then I had a feeling the Oilers would have been in a much better position the rest of the game. So, and like I said, they were able to fight back, but just needed to clean up a few little issues, and what we'll talk about in a bit showed that they were able to learn from those. Let's actually break down those 2 games now. And in Game 3, Zach Hyman scored twice, including his league-leading 6th goal of the playoffs, and 9 different Oilers players had a point en route to a dominant 6-1 victory and a 2-1 series lead. Bob, it's always harder to score in the postseason because teams place more emphasis on defense. But for a player like Hyman, who has a penchant for battling in front of the net and scoring gritty goals, does it come as any surprise to you that his numbers haven't dropped off from the regular season at all?
No, not to me at all. If anything, I'm surprised that LA hasn't made that a focus of keeping better tabs on Hyman, because everyone knows where he's going to go. Like, he goes to the paint, he goes to the posts, and he just, like, he gets the center of gravity down there and just battles hard. He's so heavy on the stick when he's in there. It's a recipe for success, and he's found that rhythm this year more so than other years, and he's had good scoring years before, but he definitely elevated it to an extreme degree this year. And he's doing the same things. He finds those quiet zones. He gets the most of his success from 3 feet from the net or right up against the post. But he's also able to kind of float himself up into the slot and into the low slot, the high slot. Like, he just knows, he has that goal scorer's instinct. He knows where to be. He knows where success is. And other teams just can't seem to be able to control him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Hyman is built for playoff hockey, like you said, for all those reasons. But he hunts down every puck in the corners. He wins battles along the boards to keep plays alive, and he continuously puts his body on the line in front of the net, and he's getting rewarded for it. Both of his goals in Game 3 were scored in the blue paint, as you mentioned. And when you have a player like that who's willing to absorb punishment from opposing defenders down low and bang in rebounds and loose pucks, he's bound to have success in the playoffs. And his second goal of the night was also his 60th goal of the regular season and playoffs combined. And he became only the 7th player in Oilers history to reach 60 goals between the regular season and playoffs, along with Gretzky, Curry, Messier, Anderson, Draisaitl, and McDavid. Everyone in that group is either in the Hockey Hall of Fame or headed there eventually. So, I mean, an incredibly impressive accomplishment for Hyman. And at this rate, I think he'll hit 70 goals before the playoffs are over.
I think one of the key things you mentioned there, and it gets said often, but I don't think everybody sinks in, is the fact that he's willing to go in there. He's willing to go to the blue paint. A lot of guys are saying, like, they see, you always hear about that's where you score the goals. Why aren't more guys doing it? Well, because more guys aren't willing. Like, you do take a brutal punishment in there. Like, it takes a special person to get in there and, have the puck hit you, have guys cross-checking you, hacking you, and just all over you, harassing you. That's a lot of that's a lot to fight through. And this is the best I've seen an Oiler do in that area since Ryan Smith, to be honest.
Yeah, and he does have a lot of Ryan Smith tendencies, and that's a common player comparison that Oilers fans like to make, for good reason, too. But when you look at the way that Hyman plays, I mean, that's the kind of guy that Oilers fans love. And like I said, I mentioned all those Hall of Famers a second ago. Don't get me wrong, those players are loved by Oilers fans too, but he really matches the blue-collar mentality that the city has, doesn't he?
100%, and I'm glad you touched on that, because he is consistently one of the hardest working, if not hardest working Oiler on the ice on a game-to-game basis, and that is very much a blue-collar attitude where You put your head down, you put your work gloves on, you tie up your work boots, and you just go at her, and you earn your paycheck. And he earns every single penny that we're paying him.
And I think that it also really helps negate the narrative that some people have that he was this child of privilege who you've seen it come out lately. Some of the negative stories from outside of Edmonton that he was gifted a lot of opportunities because of a wealthy upbringing, and the fact that maybe a lot was given more than earned. And Zach Hyman doesn't fit that mold. He's the complete opposite of any of these things. And I think it's just really sort of a weak attempt to discredit what he's done this year, especially when we talk about how he goes out there and earns everything he has. There are most nights where you can't pick out another guy on the team who outworked Zach Hyman.
No, and I've yet to see him score a silver spoon goal. Like, they are all blue collar goals. Like, you don't see too many of his stuff end up on the highlights because they're all like 3 to 4 feet or that kind of thing, and just taking a beating and sticking with it, and earning that paycheck.
Yeah, but I mean, as we go deeper in the playoffs, those goals are going to become more and more valuable as the room in the offensive zone just even tightens up more, because we know as the playoffs go on, it just gets increasingly difficult to score. So having a guy like that who's going to play physical, not be afraid to take a beating, he's going to be the guy who I think is going to, outside of McDavid and Draisaitl, maybe be the Oilers' third most valuable player in the series, at least from an offensive perspective.
And a dark horse for that one there too. I think we're going to see something similar come from Corey Perry yet. I don't think we've seen the playoff Corey Perry yet. He has those similar traits, especially around the blue paint and working for those loose pucks and busting his tail as well. We haven't really needed him to be that guy yet, but as these playoffs go on, as you mentioned, Eric, those type of plays are going to become invaluable, and Corey's one of those guys that can bring it and has brought it. And
I mean, he's been through the battle for almost 2 decades. This is, and you can't expect him to be what he was 10 years ago. So you have to keep expectations within check there. But like you said, he's a playoff battler. He's a guy who has been to the final 4 times before, won a cup. So even though he might not be the offensive player he once was, I think that it's safe to say he will score a big goal at some point in the playoffs.
Yeah, we will have a Corey Perry playoff moment. Absolutely.
And Connor McDavid also picked up 3 points in the victory. McDavid now has 63 points in his last 32 playoff games dating back to 2022, which is just shy of 2 points per game. He also recorded his 3rd consecutive series with 10 or more points. Bob, it seems like every night McDavid is either reaching or approaching a new milestone or record. Have you almost become numb to his accomplishments at this point, or does it still amaze you watching him for the better part of a decade?
I am thankful that I don't become numb to this, and I hope I never do, because I would watch a game where the Oilers would be losing 10-0, and I wouldn't be able to change the channel because of Connor McDavid being on the ice. It's also one of these things where I never count the Oilers out. How do you count a team out? Even if you're down 4-1, 4-0 in a game, you can't count out a team that has Connor McDavid. He is a game breaker, a game changer. I am so thankful that I could clearly remember the Wayne Gretzky days. He is the greatest hockey player of all time for a reason. Connor McDavid, to me, is the most skilled hockey player I have ever seen. And he still does something amazing and jaw-dropping every game. He has that moment.
Yeah, I mean, just getting his first of the playoffs in the first period was big. Also, his 30th of his playoff career. And you could just see how pumped up he was to get it. And it wasn't one of these dazzling end-to-end McDavid goals either. It was just staying with a play, finding a loose puck, and sliding it past Cam Talbot. So great for him to finally get on the board. He'd already racked up a ton of assists by this point, but you could see how fired up he was to get that first one. And then he added 2 power play assists in the 3rd period. And with the first of those 2 assists, he picked up his 140th point of the regular season and playoffs combined. I just mentioned how Hyman also hit his 60th goal of the regular season and playoffs together. But McDavid joined Wayne Gretzky, Bobby Orr, Guy Lafleur, Mike Bossy, Yari Curry, and Paul Coffey as the only players in NHL history to record 3 consecutive 140-point seasons, including playoffs. And Bob, one thing that I think you'll notice from all the names on that list is that they played either their prime years in the 1970s or 1980s. And for McDavid to do it in this era, I mean, does that even make it that much more remarkable?
Well, I try not to compare eras as much because the game changes, so substantially.
It does, and that's a fair point too.
I think in the end, it's one of these things, like, to be mentioned those names is absolutely ridiculous. It's also a reminder to us that we cannot take for granted that we are privileged to live in the Connor McDavid era and be able to watch this kid play and do what he does. Like, those names are Hall of Famers, and they're top 100 hockey players of all time, kind of thing. And the fact that this guy who is just entering the prime of his career is already associated with them is tough to comprehend. But it's also something that we desperately cannot take for granted. Like, it is a privilege to watch this guy play.
No, it is. And I think I'm with you on one point. I don't ever want to discredit what someone did. I'm one of the biggest 80s hockey fans, despite not being around for it, that there probably is in my age group. So, but I think it does stand out when you're seeing that he's the first player in over 30 years to do this. And we've seen that routinely in the past year or two, that he's accomplishing feats that haven't been done in more than a quarter of a century. So I think it stands out a little bit more when it hasn't been done in so long.
Definitely, but that also is what you do as a generational player. Like, this is what you do. Every so generation, we have a player that they'll do this, and so Connor McDavid is that guy. So yeah, 30 years. That's a long time before we've seen something than what we're seeing now.
Yeah. And as the Oilers continued to extend their lead in Game 3, things started to get really chippy. I mean, this was by far the most penalized game in the series. And because of his physical play, Evander Kane has been a target for the Kings players in this series. He was on the receiving end of a high hit from Andreas Anglin late in the game, and then he got up and dropped the gloves with him. Bob, first, do you think it was ill-advised for Kane to take that fight, especially after there was a hit that put him on the ice for a few seconds, and the point that we were at in the game? And also, even though the Kings made the Oilers pay, or the Oilers made the Kings pay on the power play, I should say, was it maybe even a bigger positive that the Oilers just made it out of that game without any injuries?
Well, I think any game you get out of there, especially the playoffs here, without any injuries, that's huge, because the game is that much more physical, and you do have a lot more of these type of plays happening. I think we needed Evander Kane to do that. Like, he's had his moments this regular season where, he's been a little bit disgruntled, not being in the top 6 from time to time. So when he gets these opportunities, he wants to take advantage of them. And you see his emotion amp up. You see him being that much more, invested in the game. Like, he was all over in that game. Like, he was flying right from the start. So I think this kind of situation, he was he made sure that he wasn't instigating it. He wanted the guy. He wanted England for sure, but he wasn't cold cocking him, that sort of stuff. Like, he made sure that he had a willing participant. I think it was called for. It sent a message. You're not going to be, sticking your legs out on us or doing anything cheap on us. We're here to battle to the end. And also, did you see the reaction he got from the bench after he served his penalties? Like, the whole team was rallying behind him, and we're all on board with Evander Kane at that moment.
Oh, yeah, you could see the sticks banging on the boards, and I think the Kings really woke him up in Game 2. And sometimes Kane does have a tendency, if he's not playing high enough in the lineup, maybe it might seem disinterested, even if that isn't truly the case. If you're talking to him, it might appear that way. But when it's a game like that and he gets engaged by the other team, that can be a problem for them. And I think the Kings did a disservice to themselves by forcing him maybe to elevate a little bit just by getting him riled up. And that fight that he took, I think that really changed the momentum of the series too, because he scored a goal in that game. and he scored some big goals against the Kings over the past 2 years as well. So that was maybe a mistake for them, and he could be an impact player for the, let's hope for the Oilers for the rest of their playoff run.
Oh, and he was he had played really good the first 2 games as well. But you're right that the incident there in Game 3 and the way LA was focused on him, he put that game on his shoulders pretty much and said, "Okay, let's go, boys." And you get an awake Evander Kane, you have a weapon.
And the Kings are a team that really like to get under their opposition's skin and goat them into taking some bad penalties. So it's nice to see the Oilers being on the opposite end of that, where they're sort of using their physicality to get the Kings out of their comfort zone and force them into taking some bad calls. And it ultimately led to a couple 5-on-3s, which the Oilers converted on in the third period.
Well, it'd be a shorter list of to mention which power plays they didn't convert on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they went 3 for 7 in the game, and I want to talk more about that as we break down Game 4. But just before we move on from Game 3, did anyone else really stand out to you in that game?
Yeah, I thought Leon Draisaitl was fantastic. I thought Connor McDavid was fantastic. I thought Vinny Desharnais probably had one of his best games of the year in Game 3. He's one of those guys that I've felt most of the year season has been our weak link on defense. So I'm glad to see the Vinny Desharnais that we are seeing in these playoffs. He's been solid throughout. Maybe Game 2, not so much, but Game 3 was one of his pinnacle games as an Edmonton Oiler. And of course, Skinner. Skinner had a really great bounce back game after that loss in Game 2 and was elite in Game 3.
Yeah, I mean, monster game for Vinny. And if you think back to last year in the playoffs, that was his first time playing in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and maybe it was a little overwhelming to him, especially the speed, because he's not the fleetest of foot. However, he does have a very long wingspan and stick, so he can kind of keep opposing forwards to the outside, maybe a little better than some other guys if he needs something to make up for the lack of foot speed. But just taking away lanes, really being effective on the penalty kill. I thought that it was probably, like you said, one of the best games he's played in the NHL so far in his year and a half that he's been in the league, and led the team with 5 minutes and 31 seconds on the penalty kill. So it shows you how much that Chris Knoblauch trusted him out there in pivotal situations.
Well, that was one of my concerns about Vinny during the regular season, is I felt like he was becoming more of a penalty kill specialist and still gets exposed a little bit on the flow of the play on 5-on-5, but I've been really impressed with his decision making. With I think his angle work is better when he's trying to angle guys off to the boards, making them skate around him, and he's been winning a lot of loose puck battles. He really seems to be finding his niche here, and just in time too for the playoffs.
Yeah, they needed him to step up, and there's been rumors about a contract extension for him too. And when you think about in the years to come with some big salaries, like Leon's going to get a massive contract on his next deal. Evan Bouchard is playing at $3.9 million after an 80-point season as a defenseman. His next contract will probably start with a 9. If you can have a reliable third pairing defenseman who has an enormous frame like Vinny does and can be an effective penalty killer. If you can get a guy like that for around $1 million on a multi-year deal, that could help so much on the salary cap, especially when next year there's going to be the Connor Brown bonus overage added in. So to have those value contracts, I think that makes him a very valuable piece for this team, especially in the next few years until some of their prospects are maybe ready to come up and take that job.
Man, I tell you what, upcoming contracts stuff, that's a whole nother episode. Like, we got some lots of juggling to do coming up.
Save that for the off-season discussions. But yeah, just to finish up on Desharnais, I think it's impressive that not only for him to make the NHL at age 26 like he did last year, but to now find himself being a valuable piece of a Stanley Cup contender. It's probably something that he wouldn't have dreamed of 2 years ago when he was starting his fourth season in the AHL with the Bakersfield Condors.
It's such a great feel-good story, but what I love about the fact that it's not just a story. Like, it is, like, he's for real an AHL defenseman. He's not up there just because we should give him a break. I mean, he's earned it. And even if he was just up to reward him for his service in the minor leagues, like, he's shown that he can stay up there and he can do it. He's making the necessary adjustments. He keeps improving, and he's always working hard, and he's fearless out there. Like, he stands in front of everything. So yeah, he belongs where he is for sure.
All right, after a bit of a tough outing in Game 2, Stuart Skinner stopped 60 out of 61 shots in his next two contests, including a 33-save shutout in Game 4 to backstop the Oilers to a 1-0 win and a commanding 3-1 series lead on the road. Bob, what can you say about the way Skinner bounced back after a rough Game 2?
For a guy who's so young and so young in his career, Stuart Skinner, right from the start, has been very accountable after some tough games, and has shown already that one of his strengths is how he is able to bounce back from tough outings and not let that affect him too much going forward. So the fact that he's doing it on the grandest scale of them all here in the NHL playoffs, and just the way he's doing it, he almost changes his game a bit. Like in Game 2, where I thought he was having a tougher time tracking the puck. I know there were some bad bounces, but he seemed to be losing his weight a little bit. And then all of a sudden, Games 3 and 4, his tracking was through the roof. Game 4 is probably the best game I've seen Stuart Skinner track a puck. Like, he was totally in control the whole time. Very minimal rebounds. He swallowed everything. This is one of his calling cards, the way he bounces back from, so-so outings.
Yeah, and I think especially last year, there might have been a lack of confidence in the fan base in him a little bit after the postseason, because he did get pulled 4 separate times, and that even comes after an all-star rookie performance during the regular season. But we all know that the playoffs are a different beast. And he did get pulled, like I said, twice against the Kings and then 2 more times against the Golden Knights before the Oilers bowed out of the playoffs in the second round. But this season, it's like you said, he's very calm and cool and just doesn't seem to let a loss or a bad goal faze him. He just resets and focuses on the next shot. So that is something that you like to see from a goalie who's still so young, to have that mental toughness. And I think that it will serve him well throughout the rest of his career. Bob, would you call this maybe the best 2 games back-to-back that he's played in his career?
Wow, that's a good question. I do think that this Game 4, and I do kind of keep a running scorecard of Oilers on a game-to-game basis, being the hockey nerd that I am. And the mark that I gave Stuart Skinner in Game 4, I hadn't given a mark that high since March 30th of 2023 in a 2-0 win against, you'll never guess it, the LA Kings. So this is probably the best game he's played in 2 years as an Oiler. When it comes to back-to-back, it's tough to argue, because he, not just a 6-1 drubbing where the offense kind of took over, he was also elite in that game. The score isn't really that indicative of how much we actually needed Stuart Skinner that game still to do what he did. So I think there's an argument to be made. This could be the best 2 games performance in consecutive games for Stuart Skinner. I'd have to look into it deeper to verify that as a for sure, but definitely an argument could be made for it.
Yeah, and I think that you look at some of the shots that they got. The Oilers did a really good job of keeping plays to the outside, but they did still have some grade A chances where he came up big, and I think maybe there was a collective scare within the fan base when the Oilers took a penalty with about 10 or 11 minutes left in the third period, and you thought, oh, is this going to be the one chance that the Kings need? But ultimately he was up to the task and was able to hold on, and it's only the 4th time in Oilers history where they've pulled off a 1-0 win in the playoffs. And you think back to 1984, the first time they did it, with Grant Fuhr stopping all the shots in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final against the New York Islanders, and we all know how that playoff run ended. So let's hope that 40 years later, the Oilers are going to have a similar finish to their season this year.
I think another big strength from that game is the fact that the Oilers show that they can win in dramatic fashion in either way. They can pour on the offense for 6 goals, or they could crack down the defense and not allow 1. Yeah, there was 33 shots again, but like you mentioned, Eric, was that a lot of them came from the outside. They probably had about, I think it was 6 grade A's But that's 27 shots that were more or less from the outside. Stuart Skinner made the saves when he was called upon in big moments. Team defense was I didn't think a single Oiler had a weak game or even just an average game. I thought every single one of that on that roster had an above average game, and the attention to defense was very, very impressive.
Yeah, and I really loved the maturity of the group in this game, because you could see how committed they were to team defense, and they weren't cheating for offense or looking to fly the zone early for that breakout pass. They just stuck to their guns, and yeah, you'd like to see more than 13 shots in a game. Like it was a very low total, especially for a team with as much firepower as this group. But on some nights, that's just the way that you have to win. And they were committed to doing that. And as they go deeper in the playoffs, that is going to become something that they're probably going to have to do at some point, because as you go on and play teams with an elite goaltender, like if they run into Ottinger in the conference final or Hill, depending on if Vegas or the Golden Knights get there, or if Dallas get there, you're not going to be scoring 6 or 7 goals a night, even with the likes of Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on your team. You still might be able to get 4 or 5 some games, but playoff hockey does get tighter, even for a team that has as much offensive skill as the Oilers do.
Well, I do think that this was actually an in-game adjustment in Game 4. I think they were finally ready for, like they weren't in Game 2. They were ready for a desperate LA team that they were going to come out hard. So their first focus was defense. Let's defend against this storm and then try to create some offense after the fact. And I think after about 2 periods there, they were kind of waiting for LA to get desperate and make that push and then to capitalize on the mistakes. So I actually expected us to have like a 10-plus shot third period, because LA would be pushing and they'd be prone to mistakes and the Oilers would capitalize on. You have to give LA some credit that they didn't really make too many big mistakes. They kept constant pressure on. So the Oilers adjusted their game and said, all right, I guess we'll just play defense then. And that they did.
And how much of a confidence boost do you think it is for the Oilers to know that the Kings threw everything they possibly had at them and the Oilers were still able to shut them down? They only allowed 1 goal in 2 home games for the Kings, and that goal came from a defenseman.
And on the flip side, what does that do to the confidence of the LA Kings? They threw everything at the Oilers that they possibly could in different manners, and they just can't seem to get away with a victory.
Yeah, I think that it would be pretty demoralizing. It's one of those ones that's going to be hard for them to come back from. And you look at them now having to win 3 straight, including 2 of those games being in Edmonton, which has been a tough building for them. It's a daunting task, and they made the goaltender switch, right, taking Cam Talbot out and putting David Rittich in, and he was probably better than they expected. And the Oilers have had Rittich's number over the past few years too. So I thought that maybe this would be a game where it's actually a mistake taking Cam Talbot out. But, I guess credit to him that he turned down a good performance despite not seeing a lot of rubber in that game. And as a former goalie, I'm sure you would love that too when you only have to stop maybe 13 shots in a night. Actually,
that's incorrect. Any games I had that were under 20 shots, like it's tough to feel the rhythm of the game. It's tough to feel part of the game. You definitely don't feel like you're in it. You're focused properly. I'd rather have games where I get 50 shots. You're in that zone as opposed to 13 shots where you really got to concentrate on focusing on what's going on, and also knowing you see a guy like Skinner putting on a show. You realize how much bigger your next stop is. The guy across from you just stopped, 12 in a row, and now they're coming down on a rush. And I really need to make this save more than anything. So no.
Plus, you can get cold too, right? I mean, that's a good point, and I'm glad you pointed that out to me. But having to go, let's say, 10, 12 minutes between shots, and then all of a sudden you're facing that first one. Does staying in the rhythm have a big factor of it too? Of just even if you are getting a bunch of even if you are not getting that many shots, but the other team is going a long time between getting one on you.
Yeah, it's frustrating. And it's very frustrating when the other goalie is putting on a show, because you realize that your responsibility has just become that much greater. There's nothing you have to kind of feel for Rittich. I mean, if the Oilers weren't playing, I would have felt for Rittich, because 13 shots and you let one in, that can get to you. But also another thing we didn't touch on yet, Eric, was the fact that one of the Kings' strengths this year was their penalty kill, and they were second in the league, and they are just getting again another shot that just demoralizes them that they can't kill a penalty against this potent Oilers power play.
That's true. And even though the even strength scoring has been fairly close in this series, the Oilers have dominated the Kings on the special teams. They got their one goal of the game, an Evan Bouchard blast that was turned out to be the game winner. And Edmonton is 8 for 15 on the power play, which is good for a league best 53.3% in the playoffs, while the Kings are 0 for 11 with the man advantage. And that's probably the biggest reason why the Oilers are up 3-1 in the series, isn't it?
Yeah, special teams. Winning the special teams will most likely win you the game the majority of the time. And that's another good point there, our penalty kill. There's so much focus on our power play, and rightly so, because it is, historically dangerous. I have as much faith in our penalty kill right now in this series as I do in our power play. And it's not even just the fact that these guys aren't scoring goals. They're not even getting too many elite chances against. Like our collapsing in front of Skinner, our shot blocking, our battles for loose pucks, it's been extremely impressive so far in this series.
Yeah, and look, the power play is always going to get more attention because of the fact that McDavid and Draisaitl play on it, and they're two of the biggest stars in the league. But since November 11th, when Chris Knoblauch took over behind the bench, the Oilers ranked first in goal differential, third on the power play, but seventh on the penalty kill. And I think that's a big factor, too, is that not only were they this potent offensive team that could score at will on the power play, but their penalty kill was even top 10 in the league. And despite the turnaround, I don't know if many people are pointing to that as a big enough reason for why the Oilers had such success over the past 5 months.
Well, and like you said, because of the attention our power play gets, and rightly so. But Knoblauch's also one of the first guys that will give Mark Stewart the credit for that turnaround, and
Yes.
and rightly so. And the numbers don't lie.
Yeah, and I think it's nice that you have two assistant coaches that are former defensemen in the league, but they played in different eras and played completely different styles. Like Coffey is really pushing all the defensemen to be able to make plays. And even if you're not a quote-unquote puck-moving defenseman, to go out of your comfort zone and not be afraid to make a play. And if you make a mistake, then so be it, because Paul will be the first to tell you he made a ton of mistakes in his career too. But you can't be afraid to try and transition the puck up ice, especially when the Oilers have such great attacking forwards. You want to get the puck in their hands as quickly as possible. And conversely, for Mark Stewart, played in the league more recently, would understand a lot of the power play schemes that the other team is trying to implement. And I think that having a younger coach like him, who it would be familiar with a lot of these power play forwards on the opposition, is a big benefit to this club.
Yeah, and you're bang on about the fact that they are two different styles that they're used to, and you see Coffey's influence when it comes to, like you mentioned, making plays, but also timing of when to pinch, and the coverage in regards to pinching, and of course Stewart's D zone coverage has been coaching has been phenomenal. So yeah, our penalty kill is becoming a weapon in itself.
So in a game like that, where Stuart Skinner is undoubtedly the team's MVP and first star of that game, did anyone else really stand out to you? Or in a game when the Oilers get under 20 shots, is it hard to notice anyone too much?
No, because again, the attention to detail on the defensive zone coverage. And for me, I thought Draisaitl was our best defensive forward that game, which was great to see because he is one of our leading point getters as well. He had some crucial face-off wins at the end. He also made a shot block basically right before the buzzer to help preserve a 1-0. And I thought Bouchard actually showed how strong he can be defensively.
I was going to say that too. And he got pointed out on the Hockey Night in Canada panel too. And he's often praised for his offense. And of course, that's going to come with a guy who's on the blue line pushing for 20 goals and finished north of 80 points. But he doesn't often get praised for the defensive side of the puck.
Yeah, and he was making some great decisions. And especially, I thought he played the body a lot more effectively than he has in the last few games. He showed that he can put the defense in the defenseman as well.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think we're just seeing some of the guys down the lineup really play strong too. I thought Dylan Holloway had a solid game too, and he was getting in on the forecheck, hustling back too, and maybe that's why we're going to see him elevated. In practice today, he was up on the third line. So and Warren Fogle was dropped down to the fourth line. So this was something that I was really pushing for after how he played in Game 2, scoring the first 2 goals of his postseason career, was that you have to find a way to give this guy more ice time. I think that the players who are playing well should be rewarded. And in the last 3 games, he would be a guy that I think really has elevated and deserves to play higher in the lineup, especially even this goes back to Game 3. If you remember, after the high hit that Anglin laid on Kane, Holloway was the first guy to come over and give him a shot back and just say, that's not going to be accepted. So you like to see him standing up for his teammates too, and not being afraid to challenge a bigger player.
Well, Holloway's evolution has been phenomenal. Like, I thought he was maybe a bit timid in Game 1 still. Maybe the nerves got to him a bit. Game 2, I think he had the second least ice time of all our forwards, and I thought he was our best player of that game.
Yeah, I mean, when you're only playing like 7 or 8 minutes and you score twice, including a very important goal in the fourth period or the third period, which tied at 4-4 and ultimately sent it to overtime. That was a huge goal. And when you get 2 goals from your fourth line, it sucks to waste that kind of an effort. The Oilers should have pulled out a win in that game. And, we'd be talking about a 4-game sweep and already resting right now. So a bit of a tough break there, but I think that it's been encouraging. This has been an awakening for Dylan Holloway, and I think that he is going to carry this through into next season, where he should be pushing for a top 6 role.
Well, I'll tell you what this does, because we know that Holloway isn't a fourth line player. That's not his career trajectory, but he is that in the playoffs right now. And what he has done is he's made that fourth line actually a scoring threat as well, which now gives us actually 4 lines capable of scoring goals. So that's a pretty good weapon to have too here for a long playoff run.
I want to give a shout out to Ryan McLeod as well. I thought he had a great game, showed a lot of hustle, made some smart plays, showed that he could not be afraid of the moment either. This was a guy who, was skating the puck up the ice, and even though the play didn't really turn into much once he got into the offensive zone, he was still getting the puck headed in the right direction more often than not. And I thought that he was really committed defensively. So drew a penalty as well in the second period that ended up leading to the game-winning goal. So, a good game from him too. And let's see what he and Holloway are able to do together on the third line next game.
His best game of the playoffs so far, I agree. Also, very impressed with how Derek Ryan was able to come into the lineup and be as effective as he was. Again, he was out there for the dying minute of the game, battling for loose puck in the corner. I was actually surprised to see that change, because I actually thought Carrick's last 2 games were very effective. And the fact that he sat out and we bring Derek Ryan in, but then that shows why Knoblauch is who he is, because Ryan was fantastic.
Yeah, and I think that's great to have a guy like that who can still come in and pinch hit in a role like that. I don't think that he's ever going to be an everyday NHLer again. There was a bit of a step back this year from his first 2 years in Edmonton, but he still signed for 1 more year at $900,000. And next year, if he's your 13th forward and he plays 40 odd games, I'm okay with that. They might want to bring back Sam Carrick as the more permanent, if you want to call it that, or maybe he splits time with Ryan in that fourth line center spot. But it's nice to know that when Ryan does come in, he can still give you a good game, and maybe the extra time off will actually help him.
Yeah, because he is one of our older players, so his legs are a bit rested and he's motivated. And I'm sure he signed on for that $900,000 just because he knows this is his best chance to win here before he ends up calling it a career.
And honestly, maybe if the Oilers do win the Stanley Cup this spring, that he doesn't end up deciding to just call it a career anyway. It's hard to say, but he still is under contract for 1 year, and he might not want to leave the money on the table. Bob, I really appreciate you jumping on the show with me tonight. Just before we call it a night, though, what do you have coming up? Do you have any articles in the works, and where can people follow you?
Well, it's kind of the timing of the first round is kind of odd for me, because I'm actually in mid-move right now. I'm moving out to a farm here just outside of Beaumont. So I haven't been able to commit too much to articles on heavy hockey, but I hope to be picking that up again here in the second round. Other than that, you can just follow me along there on Twitter or X, whatever it's called. And hopefully I'll chalk something up for heavy hockey here shortly. But always a pleasure talking hockey with you, Eric. I always appreciate the invite. One of my favorite shows to do. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, man, for sure. And hopefully the next time we're talking on this podcast, we'll be breaking down an Edmonton Oilers Stanley Cup victory.
There we go. That's the only prediction that matters I get right.
There you go. All right. Have a good night, Bob.
You bet.
So for Bob Schmidt, I'm Eric Friesen. This has been the 99 Forever podcast. We're out.